So today we look at these sisters. And we go a little further into this understanding of living as disciples for the transformation of the world. And we consider this story where Jesus goes to the home of Martha and her sister Mary. Now, a theologian by the name of Bonnie Thurston writes that this story appears in Luke's Gospel during a period when Jesus has set his face to Jerusalem. And you know what happens when Jesus gets to Jerusalem. Many of Jesus' teachings occur in the context of a meal. Y'all know how we like to eat. And these stories often include Pharisees. You know, a good story is not a good story until there's some opposition that appears. Y'all watch TV, you have Netflix, Amazon Prime, HBO, CBS, you don't have any of that. You just sit at home and read your Bible 24/7. So that means nothing to you right now. So many of his stories also include the Pharisees, who will challenge him every chance they get. And I would imagine you have people in your life who challenge you every chance they get too. But along this journey, Jesus meets a variety of people, including wealthy and poor people, clean and unclean, righteous and sinners. He met people like you and me. And in today's story, Jesus visits the home of Martha, and her sister Mary was there too. The usual interpretation of this story pits the two women against each other, usually a way of focusing on Mary as the favored and righteous of the two sisters. And in contrast, there's Martha. And she's portrayed that she's so distracted by fixing dinner and cleaning up afterwards that Jesus must scold her for not putting her domestic duties aside and joining Mary at his feet. And in that interpretation that we've heard, that we brought forward, the lesson has been to be like Mary and don't be like Martha. To take time to listen quietly to Jesus. Don't be distracted by your housework or anything else. That's what we've carried forward. But the question here is, does that really sound like the teaching of Jesus? Does it sound, consistent with everything else we know about Jesus? That Jesus would say, disregard everything else in your life and just come and listen to me. Okay, here's what I need you to do right now. You know that thinking that you use Monday through Saturday? I need you to use that on Sunday. I know our Sunday thinking is usually different from our Monday through Saturday thinking. So our Sunday thinking allows us to hear things that don't make sense and don't fit together, and we say hallelujah and amen because somebody said it on Sunday, and we move on. But that's why on Monday it doesn't matter to us because it didn't make sense and it didn't connect with us. So use your Monday through Saturday thinking where stuff has to make sense. And when it doesn't make sense, you say, that don't make sense. Can you do that? You put on your Monday through Saturday thinking. Now, if you go out on Monday with your Sunday thinking, now that's a whole other thing. That's going to be a problem. But you can use your Monday through Saturday thinking on Sunday. You really can. It'll bless your life, I promise you. See, and I've always thought that Martha gets the short end of the stick in this story. And it's difficult to find scholars and commentaries to give any other perspective. And the reason for that is most scholars and those who write commentaries are not women, but they're men. I told you I was in the desert. But see, I don't understand the benefit of placing these two important women as adversaries. They're two sisters, no less. Now, I have sisters. And I have it on good authority that you don't have to create reasons for sisters to be at odds with each other. conversation. Amen. I mean, they'll figure out how to be at odds. Any of you have sisters? Okay, so am I making this up? I mean, they'll find a way. They will find a way. Now, what I know is to make sure I just get some popcorn and sit back and watch and don't get involved in that drama. Amen. Just let it unfold. Let it unfold. So we didn't have to create an adversarial relationship between these very important women. And we didn't have to create an adversarial relationship between these sisters. And continuing to follow with Bonnie Thurston and a few others, I want to suggest that instead of contrasting these two sisters, that we look at a fresh interpretation, and we instead focus on two main points in this story. First, this story represents clear and convincing evidence that women were active as leaders in the early stages of Jesus' movement. In this story, we see women who are referred to by their names as opposed to being identified by some relationship with a male. And they host Jesus in their home. You see this in verse 38, where it says, a woman named Martha welcomed him into her home. Martha was a homeowner. Martha was large and in charge. Well, I mean large in the, in the sense of having it going on. She was grown. She was a grown woman, doing grown woman things in the home that she owned. Now, how many of you remember being told the story in this way, that Jesus was at the home of Mary and Martha, and Martha was busy in the kitchen making the meal and cooking the meal, and meanwhile Mary was sitting at the feet of Jesus. How many of you remember the story that way? Okay, look at your Bible. Look at your Bible. I want to show you something, because this blessed my life this week. It blessed my life this week. Saw this in a whole new way. Whole new way. In verse 38, I want you to listen. We're going to do this verse by verse. I want to see what you hear. Now, as they went on their way, he entered a certain village where a woman named Martha welcomed him into her home. Anything about a kitchen there? No. Okay. Verse 39. She had a sister named Mary who sat at the Lord's feet and listened to what he was saying. Anything about a kitchen? No. Verse 40. But Martha was distracted by her many tasks. So she came to him and asked, Lord, do you not care that my sister has left me to do all the work by myself? Tell her then to help me. Kitchen? No. 41. But the Lord answered her, Martha, Martha, you are worried and distracted by many things. Kitchen? No. Dinner? No. Dishes? Barefoot? No. All right, okay. 42. There is need of only one thing. Mary has chosen the better part, which will not be taken away from her. Kitchen? No. Dinner? No. Then what have you been telling people about this story? Monday through Saturday. Martha, a homeowner, hosting Jesus. Now, mind you, at this point, Jesus isn't all that he is now, right? There have been no cross, there have been no resurrection, there have been no sighting. At this point, all they're doing is trusting that this man knows what he's doing and he knows what he's talking about, and we believe he's the Messiah, and we are going to follow him. That's it. There are no books written about him. There are no paintings with him, and all those men sitting on the same side of the table looking out at the camera or whatever they were doing. I don't know why they were all sitting on the same side of the table eating. I have no clue. But none of that had happened at this point. All they had was a faith that he's the Messiah, and somehow all this is going to work out. Come to my house. Martha's home. See, in the ancient world, this would have been unusual for a woman to own property. Only under certain circumstances were women legally allowed to own property, and there were very few who met the criteria. But here we have a home identified not as belonging to their brother, their father, their husband, or that other man they used to be with. None of that. Instead, it is the home of Martha, the shunned and scolded sister. So we've chosen to name her as the shunned and scolded, as opposed to seeing in the text that this is her house. Would you let somebody come in your house and disrespect you? But you've been in hers all these years disrespecting her. So this fact, in and of itself, ought to give us pause to think about what it means. I can't imagine that the author of Luke provided this detail unintentionally. I mean, what might Luke be telling us about Mary and Martha through this careful wording? And secondly, in spite of much of the interpretive history, this really is not a text that pits housework against study, or even works righteousness against grace. For example, despite many of our own assumptions that a meal and its cleanup was involved in Martha's distractions, we see from reading the text that there's no mention of a kitchen, no mention of a meal anywhere in the text. Now, you will find some translations that will say she was busy preparing for a meal, but do you know who wrote those translations? But there's no mention of it. And Luke, in fact, chooses a very technical term to describe Martha's work in verse 40. Diakonia is the word that he uses. And in the New Revised Standard Version, which is the version of the Pew Bible that you read from, this word is translated as many tasks. But Thurston, that we referenced earlier, provides more insight. She writes that Martha, we are told in verse 40, was distracted by her many tasks, literally, by much serving. Again, the Greek word is diakonia, which in Luke is used more in the context of activity of an in-between kind, or like a spokesperson or something like that, more so than it being used to describe someone who's waiting on tables. Diakonia, which is another form of that word we just used, in Luke and in Acts, denotes participation with others in leadership and ministry on behalf of the community. 6 of the 8 uses in Acts alone point to leadership in the church and proclamation of the gospel. So is Martha serving domestic activity or ministry? It may well be that Martha is distracted by much ministry. So Martha's many distracting tasks may not have been the dinner table, but rather the overwhelming work of ministry, of serving others. The gospel, the good news that was being imparted unto her and to Mary and many others. The word diakonia is also the root of the word for the ecclesiastical office of deacon in the early church. Have you ever heard the word deacon before? Deacons are servants. It's the same base word that is used here to talk about what Martha is doing. Okay? I just want us to be clear. Now, but for some, their ministry is that ministry of serving, caring for that aspect of hospitality from the kitchen and in the kitchen and that sort of thing. That is their ministry. If it's not yours, stay out of there. Okay? But that's not what the writer here is drawing our attention to. So here's how we cast new light on the story and find our own clarity. What if Martha's chief complaint isn't that Mary is failing to help her with housework, but rather that she isn't keeping up her half of the ministerial duties? Now I just lost half the room right there. Now if this story we're talking about James and John, we wouldn't allow it to say that James or John were in the kitchen. But when we mention Mary and Martha, we question if this is possible. Do you know the odds? Do you know the hurdles? Do you know the obstacles and the opposition that these women have had to live through to be who they are and to be where they are? Do you know your own story well enough to know the obstacles and the opposition and everything that you've had to go through and to get over to be where you are? If you do, beloved, hold that true for your sisters. What if instead of putting these women in opposition to one another, we focus on the amazing fact that these two women were remembered by Luke's community as beloved disciples of Jesus and leaders in Jesus' movement? Why is it so easy for us to see them at home and not see them in leadership? Women have had the right to vote in the United States of America only since 1920, not even for 100 years. And the Methodist Church, of which we are a part, one of the few denominations that ordains women, have been doing so only since 1956. And we're the progressive ones. Yeah, but those chickens have come home to roost. And our true colors are being seen around the world. That's 63 years. That's not that long. Now, when I was 12, 63 seemed like a long ways away. Now that I'm not 12, 63 ain't that long. But here's why this is important for us to pause and to think about it, to use our Monday through Saturday thinking on this Sunday, is that these decisions and other human rights are constantly in danger of being reversed by those who do not believe that women or others should have equal rights as men, as white men, as heterosexual men. Oh, now you're going to get quiet. Because in the vast majority of the Christian faith and practice around the world, women are still denied a place among the ordained clergy leadership in the church. That's just the reality. Even in the Methodist Church and other parts of the globe, women cannot serve in leadership. And so here's how we wrap this up, because we're using our Monday through Saturday thinking. And just from thinking about this text in some new ways, we can see how simple, unexamined reading and interpretation can other and ostracize over half of the human population. But the question for you to now wrestle with is, who does your gospel allow you to exclude? Is it the immigrants, the refugees, the orphans, the widows, the 1%, the 99%, the gay, the trans, the question, that neighbor who keeps up too much fuss, those people who are buying up, those people who are selling out, those who've been sold out, those who've been kept down, those who want a seat at the table, and those who placed on the menu. Who does your gospel allow you to exclude? Monday through Saturday. That's what you need to be thinking about. Because if we're not reading the text critically and not applying it intentionally, we think it's okay to go through life dismissing folk. And sometimes, beloved, we can get so comfortable and so consistent in our dismissal of people that we'll wake up one day and realize that we have been dismissed. And sometimes we were the ones who dismissed ourselves. May this be the last day that we use our gospel to exclude. And may it be the first day that we use this gospel to open the doors of our hearts and our lives as wide as possible and say yes, 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 because the gospel says so. Amen?